all in their dressing gowns, and
iconic.
I was standing in the middle, and he cut all their heads out of the photo. So it could have been anybody.
At a quiet evening gathering in Edinburgh, beneath the warm amber lights of a modest bookshop filled with lifelong admirers, Sam Heughan, known to millions as the charming and stoic Jamie Fraser from Outlander, did something no one expected. He didn't read a passage from his new fictional memoir, Walking Backwards Through the Rain, nor did he discuss the glamour of Hollywood or his life on set. Instead, he chose to speak about something that had remained locked within him for years. His childhood, the part of his story that the world never saw and that he himself had long avoided confronting. The crowd of devoted fans, accustomed to seeing him through the lens of success and strength, fell into silence as he began to speak. His Scottish lilt softened with memory. "I've spent most of my life moving forward fast," he said, his eyes distant, as if afraid the past would catch up with me. "But it's time to turn around and look at my childhood. A childhood no one ever asked about and that I never talked about." His words hung in the air, carrying the weight of long-buried truth. The host paused, seemingly unsure how to respond, and then nodded gently. Sam's gaze drifted somewhere far beyond the room as he began, unguarded and unfiltered, telling the story of a boy who grew up not among red carpets and city lights, but in a wooden house that shivered with the Scottish wind. "I was born in rural Balmaclellan, Dumfries and Galloway," he said softly. "Not the romantic countryside people imagine, but a cold, damp, isolated place. We lived in a small wooden house with no electricity, no central heating, and sometimes no food." He smiled faintly, almost apologetically, as if embarrassed by the memory, then continued. "In the winter, my mother would light a fire every morning just to keep the water from freezing. Some mornings the smoke would sting our eyes, but it was better than the cold. I still remember how the frost would form patterns on the inside of the windows." The audience sat still, their admiration turning into something deeper, compassion. "There was one winter," he went on, "when it snowed so heavily that I couldn't go to school for 10 days. No one cleared the streets, no buses, no cars. We studied by candlelight. I remember my mother sitting with us, trying to teach us something to keep our minds away from hunger." He paused, inhaling as if to steady himself. "My father left when I was very young. I don't remember his face, but I remember the feeling of waiting for someone who would never come back." The pain in his voice was not dramatic, not performed. It was real, the kind that leaves quiet marks on a person's soul. "My mother was an artist," he said after a moment. "She taught me how to draw, to read poetry, and most importantly, to trust my imagination, because it was the only thing that couldn't be taken away from us. She used to say, 'When you have nothing, you still have stories.' I think that's where it all began for me." He smiled faintly, lost in the memory. "We didn't have much. Sometimes, when there was no food, my brother and I would drink hot water and go to bed early, pretending we weren't hungry. Mom worked freelance, selling sketches, portraits, anything she could. But there were weeks with no income. I remember one summer when we couldn't afford new shoes, so I had to wear my brother's old pair. I stuffed them with bits of cloth so they would fit. I was ashamed then, but now I realized those were the things that made me." He glanced up, his voice softer. "You see, I thought success was about escaping those memories, but now I understand, it was about honoring them." The room was completely still. Some fans had tears in their eyes. They were seeing not the actor who had conquered screens across the world, but the boy who had learned to dream in the dark. "I didn't have a television until I was 12, Sam said, "but I had books. I had a wardrobe. I used to lock myself inside it, take a torch and imagine that I was a knight, a king, a storyteller, or sometimes just someone brave enough to change his world. It sounds silly, I know, but that was where I felt most alive. That's where acting began for me. Not on a stage, but in that wooden box with flickering light and the hum of my own imagination." Someone in the audience chuckled gently, and Sam laughed with them, easing the heaviness of the moment. "Funny, isn't it, that a boy hiding in a wardrobe could one day end up performing for millions? Maybe imagination is just a form of survival." He leaned back, recalling a pivotal moment that altered his life's direction. One day, a literature teacher took me to Glasgow to see a Shakespeare play. It was the first time I saw real stage lights. I didn't understand every word, but I remember the feeling. My heart was pounding, my throat was tight, and all I could think was, this is where I belong. That moment changed everything. His eyes shone, and for a moment, the boy he once was seemed to appear behind them. From that day, I knew I wanted to be an actor. I didn't tell anyone because it felt impossible. Dreams like that didn't belong to boys like me. I thought I'd grow up to be a farmer or worse, unemployed. But that dream, that single spark, kept me going. The silence that followed was full of respect. There was no applause yet, only the quiet understanding that comes when truth fills a room. My teenage years weren't easy either, he continued. I worked part-time jobs to buy books. I studied academic English on my own. I hid from my friends sometimes because I was embarrassed by my clothes. I remember skipping lunches so I could save money for train tickets to auditions. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't want pity. I just wanted a chance. He took a deep breath. People look at me now, famous, successful, lucky, whatever you want to call it, and they see only the light. But that light came from darkness. It was carved out of hunger, silence, and fear. I think that's why I never take it for granted. He smiled faintly again, and for a moment, it seemed like he was back in that small, unheated room, the fire crackling weakly against the wind. When Outlander happened, he said, everyone thought it was overnight success, but it wasn't. It was years of rejection, doubt, working in cafes, living in cheap flats, sending hundreds of audition tapes that went nowhere. I used to tell myself, if I can survive my childhood, I can survive anything. That belief kept me going. Every actor needs a reason, something that burns in their chest. For me, it was my mother's voice saying, keep imagining. There was something deeply human in his confession, not the glamour of stardom, but the resilience of the soul. You know, he said, his voice almost a whisper, poverty doesn't just take things away. It teaches you to see beauty in small places. It makes you grateful for warmth, for light, for people who stay. When I was young, I thought I was alone in that struggle, but I've learned that everyone carries something unseen, a quiet battle they've fought just to be here. That's why I try to be kind. You never know what someone had to walk through to stand where they are. He paused again, scanning the room full of faces that had followed his journey for years. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that hardship doesn't break you. It introduces you to yourself. My mother never had much, but she gave me belief. She once told me that life is like walking backwards through the rain. You can't always see where you're going, but every drop makes you stronger. That's why I named the book that way. His words carried a rare stillness, a quiet power that no performance could match. I used to think I needed to forget my childhood to move forward, but now I realize it was the foundation of everything. Every challenge, every lonely night, every cold morning by the fire. When he finished speaking, there was no applause at first, just an ocean of silence, heavy and reverent. And then, slowly, the audience began to clap, not for the celebrity before them, but for the boy who once dreamed with a torch in a wardrobe. Some people cried. Others simply nodded, their eyes glistening. Sam smiled humbly, clearly overwhelmed. I guess, he said softly, we all have to walk backwards through the rain sometimes, but that's how we find the sun again. It was a moment that would stay with everyone in that room. A rare glimpse into the soul of a man who, beneath the fame and fortune, had never stopped being that imaginative boy from Dumfries and Galloway. His story wasn't just about poverty or pain. It was about the quiet power of endurance, the beauty of imagination, and the unbreakable bond between a mother's love and a child's dream. And in sharing it, Sam Heughan didn't just reveal his past. He gave every listener permission to honor theirs too, to look back, not with shame, but with understanding. Because sometimes, the most beautiful journeys begin in the humblest of places, where the only thing strong...
Okay. The winner for Best Picture at the Oscars will be...
When I was a boy, I used to go to school in my mother's coat. That's right. She took an old wool coat, cut it down, patched it, and stitched it together so that it would fit me. It wasn't perfect. The sleeves were a little too short. The buttons never quite lined up, and it carried the faint scent of the turpentine she used while painting. But it was warm, and that was enough. I remember the way people looked at me. Not cruelly, not mockingly, but with that quiet sort of pity that makes you want to disappear. No one said anything, but their silence was heavy, and I felt every glance like a weight on my shoulders. I wanted to be invisible. There was a day, one of those gray Scottish afternoons when the sky seemed to sit right on top of the rooftops, when I sat under the school stairs and cried. I must have been 16, maybe younger. The cold concrete, the smell of wet shoes, the echo of laughter from the halls. It's all still there in my memory. I wasn't crying because I'd been teased or hurt. I was crying because I felt invisible, like I could try my hardest and it would never be enough. The dream of becoming an actor seemed absurd. What right did a boy like me have to dream of the stage when I couldn't even afford new clothes? At 17, I decided to audition for a small theater class at school. It wasn't anything grand, just a local program where students performed scenes and learned stage basics. I remember being so nervous that my hands shook. I'd practiced my lines for days in the mirror, whispering them so my brother wouldn't hear. When I finally stood in front of the panel, my voice cracked halfway through, and I forgot half the words. Afterward, one of the instructors looked at me kindly and said, "You don't have much stage presence." I laughed awkwardly, pretending it didn't hurt, but I went home that night and replayed those words again and again. They said I didn't have presence, and they were right. I didn't have anything, really. I was just a skinny, quiet boy, afraid of being seen, afraid of being laughed at, afraid of daring to believe I could be something more. A few days later, it was raining, because in Scotland, it always seems to rain when you're heartbroken. I was sitting again under those same stairs, listening to the echo of raindrops hitting the window ledge, trying not to cry but failing. I wasn't crying because of rejection anymore. I was crying because I truly believed I would never have a chance, no matter how hard I tried. It felt like life had already been written for me. Small village, small job, small life. And then, something unexpected happened. My literature teacher, Mrs. McLeod, walked by. She must have noticed my red eyes and trembling hands because she didn't ask what was wrong. She just sat beside me, quietly, and after a moment she put her hand on my shoulder. Her voice was calm, warm, and steady as she said, "You can't give up on your dream just because other people can't see it. You have to be the first one to believe in you." It was such a simple sentence, yet it cut through the noise in my head like sunlight through fog. That single sentence changed my life. I didn't realize it then, but that moment under the stairs was the beginning of everything that followed. Some months later, when I was still 17, I heard about a scholarship program for rural Scottish students to study performance and art in Edinburgh. The scholarship promised a year of study at the Edinburgh Academy of Art, a place that felt a world away from my small village. Everyone at school thought it was a long shot. "No one from here ever gets that," they said, and maybe they were right, but I applied anyway. I had no professional headshots, no fancy portfolio, no coach to help me. I only had my story. I sat at the kitchen table late one night, candlelight flickering across the page, and wrote a handwritten essay about how acting had helped me survive. The darkness, how stories had kept me alive when the world felt empty. I wrote about the wardrobe where I used to hide and perform for no one but my imagination. I sealed the letter with shaking hands and posted it the next morning, trying not to hope too much. 2 months passed. Nothing. No letter, no email, no call. I started to believe that silence was my answer. Then, early one March morning, my mother found a thin envelope in our old wooden mailbox. It had the official seal of the Edinburgh Academy. I didn't even want to open it. I'd convinced myself it was another rejection, but my mother insisted. I tore it open with numb fingers, and there, in bold black letters, were the words that changed everything. "Congratulations on being awarded a full scholarship. See you in Edinburgh in September." I screamed. My mother cried. And for the first time in what felt like years, The sun broke through the clouds and lit up the porch. It wasn't just light, it was possibility. I'll never forget that morning. For the first time, I felt like the world might have space for me after all. When I arrived in Edinburgh that autumn, the city was drenched in rain, cobblestones shining under the street lamps. I had just one small suitcase, a notebook, and £100 in my pocket. I didn't know anyone. The city felt enormous, loud, alive, and intimidating. The scholarship covered tuition, but not much else, so I had to find work quickly. People think scholarships end your hardships, but really, they just begin a new kind. I worked in a pub near the Royal Mile, waiting tables and washing dishes until late at night. The pub's basement smelled of beer and bleach, and sometimes I'd stand there during my break, reading scripts under the humming kitchen light. During the day, I cleaned tables, and in the evenings, I ran through lines from Shakespeare or Chekhov in my head. To make ends meet, I handed out flyers on windy street corners, wearing thin gloves that didn't stop the cold. During the Christmas season, I even took a job dressing up as a clown in a shopping mall. Bright red nose, oversized shoes and all. Children laughed, some ran away, and I remember thinking, at least no one knows me here. But I didn't mind. It was work, and every small thing felt like a step closer to something bigger. Sometimes I got paid with leftover pizza, sometimes with coins barely enough to cover the bus fare home. I'd eat in the student flat I shared with 3 others, rehearse monologues until midnight, and fall asleep dreaming of the stage lights I'd once seen as a boy. There were nights when I wanted to quit, nights when the city felt too big and I felt too small. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered my mother's words. If you want to escape your past, don't hate it. Make it a reason to move forward. That sentence became my compass. Whenever I felt lost or hopeless, I reminded myself that every rejection, every humiliation, every long, cold shift was part of something larger. I began to understand that the struggle wasn't my enemy. It was my teacher. It built in me a kind of quiet strength that no easy life could.